On their wedding night, a millionaire whispered to her, "I promise not to touch you until you want me to." Those simple words made her, young and innocent, fall hopelessly in love with him. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to find out how this promise changed their lives forever, subscribe to the channel and drop a like. This story will leave you breathless. The white silk dress still carried the scent of jasmine when Eleanor crossed the bedroom threshold for the first time, as a wife. Her hands trembled holding the bouquet of white lilies, and her heart was beating so strongly she was certain he could hear it. The late afternoon California light filtered through the tall windows, casting golden patterns on the Persian rug covering the hardwood floor. Outside, Napa Valley sang its eternal serenade of distant wind through the vineyards and the soft murmur of the hills. Seated in the leather armchair beside the window, overlooking the red-tiled roofs of St. Helena, the man who was now her husband remained silent. Griffin Blackwell, 48, distinguished bearing and penetrating gaze that had intimidated the most experienced investors in the country, observed the young woman with an indecipherable expression. "I promise not to touch you until you want me to." The words floated in the perfumed air like a pronouncement. There was no reproach or condescension in his voice, only a calm certainty that made something within Eleanor begin to crumble, not from fear, but from a relief so profound her legs nearly gave way. "Thank you," she murmured, not knowing what else to say, while her fingers played nervously with the lace on her sleeve. "Marriage doesn't always begin with love, Eleanor, but that doesn't mean it can't blossom over time like the vines in spring." In that moment, as the last light of day faded and shadows began their slow dance across the white walls, Eleanor understood a truth no one had told her, that sometimes the greatest proof of love isn't in what one takes, but in what one is willing to wait for. "Why?" she finally asked, finding her voice. Griffin rose slowly and walked to the window, his silhouette outlined against the sky that was beginning to fill with stars. "Because there are invisible wounds we all carry, little one. And some promises are like bandages for the soul." That night, as Napa surrendered to the enchantment of darkness and the scent of jasmine invaded the gardens, Eleanor slept alone in the grand four-poster bed beneath Egyptian cotton sheets that smelled of lavender, wondering if she would ever decipher the enigma that was now her husband. What she didn't know was that the vow whispered in the twilight of their wedding night would be the first thread of a complex tapestry they would begin to weave, never suspecting the final design life had prepared for them. The deepest promises are those made in silence, when the heart recognizes a truth the mouth isn't yet ready to pronounce. The Blackwell estate rose majestically among century-old vineyards, 20 miles from San Francisco, in the heart of Napa Valley. Built in the late 1800s during the golden age of California wine and renovated with exquisite taste, it was a labyrinth of verandas and inner courtyards where the murmur of water in stone fountains created a constant symphony. To Eleanor, the place was as beautiful as it was intimidating, a perfect reflection of the man with whom she now shared a surname, but little else. During those first weeks, Eleanor and Griffin lived like polite strangers under the same roof. She had arrived with just 3 suitcases from Concord, New Hampshire, where her family, the Harringtons, once prominent landowners who had fallen on hard times, had given her in marriage with a mixture of relief and pride. At 23, Eleanor carried 3 characteristics that defined her: a genuine sweetness that won everyone over, a quiet intelligence she hid out of shyness, and an insatiable curiosity about the world beyond the walls of her home. On her first morning at the estate, Eleanor woke to the song of robins nesting in the cherry trees in the orchard. She dressed in a simple light blue dress and went down for breakfast, finding the table set but empty. "The master left early, Mrs. Blackwell," Martha informed her, the housekeeper, a 60-year-old woman with her hair in a severe bun and eyes always moist with nostalgia. "He usually has breakfast at 6:30 and leaves at 7. He'll return for dinner, as always." "As always?" asked Eleanor, spreading cherry preserves on a piece of toast that tasted of loneliness. Martha nodded, pouring coffee into a fine porcelain cup. "Mr. Blackwell is a man of fixed habits. He's had breakfast at the same time for 15 years. And he never varies his routine." The woman looked at her with a mixture of compassion and curiosity. "Only on Sundays when he goes to church and then visits his parents' graves." That answer sketched the first portrait of the man she had married, methodical, constant, predictable. So different from the impetuous young men who had once given her glances at summer parties in New Hampshire. The first gift arrived 3 days later, a beautifully bound volume of Walt Whitman. There was no note, just a silver bookmark placed in leaves of grass. Eleanor found it on her pillow, and that night, when Griffin returned, she was reading on the veranda under the wisteria-covered pergola that created a purple rain over the white marble. "Thank you for the book," she said, closing it when she sensed his presence. Griffin nodded slightly. "I noticed you like to read. The library is at your disposal, though I'm afraid many volumes are about economics and hotel management. Don't you ever read for pleasure?" Something like a smile fleetingly crossed Griffin's serious face. "Pleasure and business rarely mix well, Eleanor. Not even when it comes to a marriage?" The words left her mouth before she could contain them, laden with unintentional irony. The silence that followed was dense. Finally, Griffin responded, "Especially when it comes to a marriage. That's why we're here, isn't it? You needed financial security for your family, and I needed a presentable wife for social events." The frankness of his words was like a sharp blow. There was no cruelty in them, only a raw honesty that made Eleanor wonder if there would ever be anything more between them than this tacit agreement. That night, gazing at the stars from her window, Eleanor reflected on the strange path her life had taken. Unlike the heroines in the novels she devoured, her story hadn't begun with love at first sight, but with a contract. Yet, as the scent of jasmine and cherry blossoms created a constant intoxication in the night air, she wondered if love could be built, like a building, brick by brick, or if it needed to be born from an instant spark. There are silences that weigh more than 1,000 words, and absences that occupy more space than any presence. In marriages of convenience, the greatest challenge isn't learning to live together, but discovering how to stop living separately under the same roof. Eleanor's closet gradually filled with small treasures: a hand-woven cashmere shawl from Scotland, artisanal chocolates from Vermont, a jasmine perfume crafted by a perfumer from Charleston, a tortoiseshell hair clip inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Each gift appeared silently, without cards or ceremonies, as if Griffin wanted to communicate in a coded language she was just beginning to decipher. "How does Mr. Blackwell know I like dark chocolate with sea salt?" Eleanor asked Martha one morning, as they had breakfast together, something that had become a habit. The housekeeper smiled enigmatically. "Mr. Blackwell observes. He's always been that way. He notices details others would overlook." It was true. He had noticed she read under the shade of the pergola, that she appreciated American craftsmanship, that she loved sweets. But what else did he see? Did he see her loneliness? Her confusion? The internal conflict that was devouring her from within? Because the conflict was heart-wrenching. Part of Eleanor felt gratitude toward Griffin for respecting her space, but another part questioned if that meant he didn't truly desire her. Was she not attractive enough? Had he regretted the marriage? Was it just a business transaction for him, like so many of his deals? One afternoon, while exploring the estate gardens, Eleanor found Griffin pruning roses. He wore casual pants and a shirt with rolled-up sleeves, so different from the impeccable businessman who left each morning. His hands, always covered by the fine leather of his driving gloves, now showed old calluses and small scars. Hands that had worked hard before holding an executive briefcase. "I didn't know you liked gardening," she said, approaching cautiously. Griffin started slightly. "It's a pastime I inherited from my mother. She used to say tending roses teaches patience and humility." "Why humility?" "Because no matter how well you care for a rose bush, you can never avoid its thorns." He paused and offered her a perfectly opened crimson rose. "But that doesn't mean it isn't worth cultivating." Their fingers brushed when she took the flower, and an imperceptible shiver ran down her spine. It was the first real physical contact between them since the wedding. "Your mother must have been a wise woman." Griffin's gaze was lost among the vineyards. She worked cleaning houses in Palo Alto so I could study. She died before seeing me become what I am now." "I'm sorry," said Eleanor, genuinely moved by this unexpected confession. "Don't be. She lived with dignity and taught me that a person's worth isn't in what they possess, but in what they're capable of building." He paused and looked at her directly. "Your family believes you married my fortune, Eleanor. But I know there's more to you than the obedient daughter who accepted this marriage without question. "How can you be so sure?" she asked, disconcerted by that statement. "Your eyes. There's a spark in them that speaks of unconfessed dreams and unanswered questions. The same spark I had when I sold newspapers in Union Square to buy economics books." That afternoon, as the sun tinged the horizon orange and purple, something subtly changed between them. It wasn't love or even attraction, but a mutual recognition. Both were more complex than they appeared, and perhaps, just perhaps, there was room for something authentic in this marriage of convenience. That night, in the privacy of her room, Eleanor placed the rose in a small vase beside her bed. For the first time since the wedding, she didn't feel like a stranger in this house. The thorns of the rose reminded her that even the most beautiful things could cause pain, but also that some wounds were worth the risk. Sometimes, it's in the smallest gestures where the greatest truths hide. A book, a flower, an accidental brush of fingers. Each is a tiny window into the other's soul, if we know how to look through it. 3 months after the wedding, the estate continued revealing its secrets to Eleanor like a book that can only be read under certain light. She had discovered the underground wine cellar, where Griffin meticulously collected vintages from around the world. She had found the old gramophone in the small sitting room, where she sometimes listened to jazz when she thought no one was listening. She had learned to move through the corridors without getting lost, to recognize the sounds of the old house creaking in the wind, to anticipate Griffin's arrival by the sound of his Tesla on the gravel driveway. But there was one door that remained locked, an entire wing of the estate to which she had no access, separated from the rest by a heavy carved wooden door she always found locked. "What's behind that door, Martha?" she asked one day, while helping the housekeeper organize the bed linens. The woman dropped the sheet she was folding, her face suddenly pale. "Those are her quarters," she answered in a low voice, as if the walls could hear them. "Her?" Martha looked nervously around before answering. "Miss Sophia, Mr. Blackwell's first wife." The revelation fell like a silent thunderclap. "Griffin was married before?" asked Eleanor, feeling the ground beneath her feet becoming unstable. "For 8 years. She left him 10 years ago, ran off with an artist from New York. She never looked back, not even when he fell ill with grief." Eleanor felt a knot in her throat. He had never mentioned a previous marriage. Suddenly, the promise on their wedding night took on new meaning. Was she just a replacement? A convenient arrangement to fill a void? Why does he keep her rooms locked? Martha picked up the sheet and continued folding it with trembling hands. "Some say it's because he still waits for her. Others that it's because he can't bear the memories. I think it's because there are wounds that don't close. We just learn to live with them." That afternoon, when Griffin returned, Eleanor observed him with new eyes. She saw the premature grey at his temples, the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders curved slightly when he thought no one was watching. He wasn't just the intimidating man who had built a hotel empire from nothing. He was someone who had loved and lost, who carried invisible scars. During dinner, served as always in the main dining room under the soft light of a Murano crystal chandelier, Eleanor gathered her courage. "You never told me about your first marriage," she said, observing how he tensed his jaw. The silence that followed was as thick as the honey that sweetened the dessert. Finally, Griffin set down his wineglass and looked at her directly. "There are stories that don't deserve to be told, Eleanor. I think I deserve to know yours," she insisted, surprising herself with her own audacity, "especially if I'm living in the shadow of a ghost." Griffin's eyes, usually cold and controlled, flashed with an emotion she couldn't identify. "You're not anyone's shadow. This marriage may not have been born of love, but I promised you respect, and I keep my word. Respect includes honesty, Griffin. Why do you keep that wing locked? Why do you guard her memory like a reliquary?" He rose abruptly, his napkin falling to the floor like a flag of surrender. "There are doors better left unopened, Eleanor, for your sake and mine." That night, as the full moon bathed the garden in silver and the crickets sang their nocturnal serenade, Eleanor made a decision. If she was going to live in this marriage of appearances, she at least deserved to know the truth hidden behind the closed doors. Not just the physical ones, but also those Griffin kept sealed in his heart. We all keep locked rooms within us, spaces we protect from the outside world. The true act of love isn't forcing these doors, but waiting patiently until the other invites us in, trusting that what we find inside won't drive us away, but bring us closer to the truth of the beloved. Determined to understand the man with whom she shared a surname but not a bed, Eleanor began her stealthy exploration. It wasn't just curiosity driving her, but a deep need to know if there was space for her in Griffin's life, or if she was merely a convenient substitute for an absence he had never overcome. Griffin's study, a sanctuary of dark wood and leather-bound books, became the first target of her investigation. She waited for a day when he traveled to Washington, D.C. on business, and with her heart pounding in her throat, turned the knob of the door he rarely left unlocked. The aroma of tobacco and old leather greeted her like an embrace from the past. On the mahogany desk, impeccably ordered, rested contracts and blueprints for a new hotel in Boston. But that wasn't what she was looking for. Her eyes turned to the small cabinet in the corner, whose key she had seen Griffin keep in the top drawer of his desk. With trembling fingers, she found the key, small, antique, with intricate designs, and opened the cabinet. Inside, chronologically ordered, were folders with the financial statements of his hotels. But at the bottom, almost hidden, she discovered a carved wooden chest. Upon opening it, time seemed to stand still. Yellowed photographs showed a woman of radiant beauty, with black hair that cascaded over her shoulders, and eyes that seemed to challenge the world. In all the images she appeared beside a younger Griffin, without grey hair, without the rigidity that now characterized him. They could be seen at social events, on exotic beaches, at gala dinners, a perfect couple, at least in appearance. But what made Eleanor's heart constrict were the letters. Dozens of them, some in Griffin's elegant handwriting, others in an impulsive and disorderly script she assumed was Sophia's. With guilt but determined, she read some. "My beloved Sophia, each day away from you is torment. New York seems a grey city without your laughter to illuminate it. Griffin, I need more freedom. I feel like a bird in a gilded cage. Your hotels, your business, your obsession with building an empire. Where do I fit in all this? I promise to change, to be the man you deserve. Just give me one more chance. I'm sorry, but I can't continue living this provincial life. San Francisco suffocates me. Your social circles bore me. Antonio makes me feel alive, understood. Something you, with your perpetually full schedule, will never understand." Tears blurred her vision. It wasn't just the evidence of a passionate love that moved her, but Griffin's exposed vulnerability in those letters. The relentless businessman, the cold man she knew, had begged, had cried, had offered to change his essence for love. Among the letters she found a newspaper clipping. Sophia's wedding to Antonio Blackwood, a renowned New York artist, just 6 months after leaving Griffin. In the photograph she radiated in an avant-garde dress, so different from the traditional bridal gown Eleanor had worn. The last letter, written by Griffin but never sent, broke her soul. "Sophia, today I sign the divorce papers. I finally give you the freedom you so yearned for. I wonder if you ever really loved me, or if I was just a stepping stone on your path to the life you wanted. I free you from me, but who will free me from you?" Eleanor carefully put everything back in its place, closed the cabinet, and returned the key to its hiding place. She left the study with a knot in her throat and a new clarity. Griffin wasn't being cruel. He was protecting himself and her from the possibility of a new abandonment. That night, when he returned from Washington, she greeted him with a different smile. She said nothing about her discovery, but something had changed in the way she looked at him. She no longer saw just the distant and controlling man, but the boy who sold newspapers, the passionate young man who wrote ardent letters, the wounded man who had learned to live with the ghost of a love that betrayed him. During dinner, when their gazes met over the candles, Griffin seemed to notice something different. "Did something happen today, Eleanor?" She smiled enigmatically. "I was reading Leaves of Grass. It's fascinating how Whitman understood that sometimes what we desire most is precisely what destroys us." Griffin looked at her for a long time, as if trying to decipher a secret code in her words. "Literature has always been a mirror where we see ourselves reflected, sometimes more clearly than we'd like. And you, Griffin, in what mirror do you look to remember who you are?" The question hung in the air like the aroma of wine in their glasses. For the first time, Eleanor felt she had a small advantage in this game of half-truths that was their marriage. Because now she knew that beneath the facade of the successful businessman, beat the heart of a man who had once dared to love without reservations. Secrets are locked doors within the soul. Some we keep to protect ourselves, others to protect those we love. But sooner or later, truth finds its way to the light, like water that always finds a crack through which to seep. 6 months into the marriage, the first invitation arrived requiring both their presence as a couple in society, a charity ball at the Fairmont, San Francisco, to raise funds for the restoration of Grace Cathedral. Eleanor had attended social events in New Hampshire, but never something so exclusive where the complete California elite would be present. "You don't have to go if you don't feel comfortable," Griffin told her when he handed her the invitation at breakfast. "I can excuse you by saying you're indisposed." Eleanor looked up from her coffee with milk. "Is that what you prefer? To go alone?" Something like surprise crossed Griffin's usually impassive face. "What I prefer is that you don't feel obligated to play a role for which you might not be prepared." "And what role would that be exactly?" she asked, feeling a spark of defiance ignite within her. "The trophy wife? The good family girl who married the rich businessman?" Griffin looked at her directly, his dark eyes unfathomable. The wife of Griffin Blackwell, a role the last person who played it abandoned in the first act. The raw honesty of his words disarmed her. It was the first time he had directly mentioned Sophia, though without naming her. "I'll go with you," Eleanor declared, with a determination that surprised them both. "Not because it's my obligation as your wife, but because I want to prove to myself that I can do it." On the day of the event, Eleanor spent hours preparing. She chose a long scarlet dress that enhanced her olive skin and deep brown eyes. Martha helped her put her hair up in an elegant bun, leaving some strands loose to frame her face. When she descended the stairs of the estate, she saw Griffin's expression subtly change. For the first time, there was warmth in that usually cold gaze. "You're resplendent," he said, with a voice that seemed to come from a deeper place than his usual business tone. "Thank you," she responded, feeling an unexpected blush rise to her cheeks. "You look very elegant, too." The journey to San Francisco passed in comfortable silence. Through the window, Eleanor observed how the vineyard landscape gradually gave way to the city lights. She wondered if Sophia had traveled this same road, seated in this same seat, perhaps looking at the same stars that now sprinkled the California sky. The Fairmont San Francisco shone like a jewel under the light of hundreds of chandeliers. The historic hotel, with its grand ballrooms and golden age glamour, seemed straight out of a fairy tale. As she entered on Griffin's arm, Eleanor felt all eyes turn toward them. "It's the new Mrs. Blackwell," whispered some ladies behind their fans. "So young, so different from Sophia." Griffin must have perceived her tension, because he gently squeezed her hand. "Breathe deeply. This world feeds on appearances. As long as you keep your head high, no one will dare to question you." During the cocktail hour, filled with the aromas of aged whiskey and expensive perfumes, Eleanor discovered she had a natural talent for social conversation. The wives of Griffin's partners, initially wary, surrendered to her genuine charm and sincere interest in their lives. Without intending to, she became the center of a small circle where they discussed art, literature, and the latest scandals of San Francisco high society. "Your wife is a revelation, Griffin," commented Jonathan Preston, a prominent investment banker. "She has the gift of making everyone feel heard." Griffin observed everything in silence, with an expression Eleanor couldn't decipher. Was he pleased? Surprised? Mentally comparing her to Sophia? The critical moment came when two ladies of San Francisco high society began to argue heatedly about who should preside over the next charity event. The tension threatened to ruin the evening. Without thinking twice, Eleanor intervened with a diplomatic suggestion that left both parties satisfied. "You have a remarkable ability for mediation, Mrs. Blackwell," the mayor of San Francisco told her, impressed. "Perhaps you should consider joining our foundation for the preservation of historic landmarks." "My wife has many talents that are just beginning to reveal themselves," Griffin intervened, surprising Eleanor. There was a tone of pride in his voice she had never heard before. At the end of the evening, as they walked through the narrow streets of Nob Hill back to the car, Griffin did something unexpected. He took her hand. The contact was firm, warm, and sent a shiver down her spine. "You did extraordinarily well tonight," he said, when they stopped in front of a small plaza where a fountain murmured secrets to the moon. Better than well, actually. You shone with your own light. Eleanor felt her heart beating wildly, though she didn't know if it was from the social success, from Griffin's hand holding hers, or from the way the moonlight silvered his strong profile, making him suddenly seem younger, more vulnerable. I was afraid, she confessed, afraid of not measuring up, of being compared to her. Griffin slowly released her hand, but his eyes didn't leave hers. There's no possible comparison, Eleanor. You are you. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, I felt proud to have someone by my side. The journey back to the estate was charged with a different silence, electrified by unexpressed possibilities. When the car stopped in front of the entrance, Griffin got out first and extended his hand to help her descend. Their fingers intertwined a second longer than necessary. "Good night, Eleanor," he said, with a new softness in his voice. "Good night, Griffin," she responded, feeling that something fundamental had changed between them. That night, lying in her solitary bed, Eleanor relived every moment of the event, every look, every word. For the first time since the wedding, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to feel her husband's lips on hers. And for the first time, this idea didn't arise from duty or curiosity, but from an authentic desire that was beginning to blossom within her. In the dance of social appearances, we sometimes find unexpected truths about ourselves. The masks we wear to face the world can become mirrors where, paradoxically, we see our true face reflected with greater clarity. The harmonious routine that was beginning to establish itself between Eleanor and Griffin was abruptly interrupted by an unexpected visit from New York. The black Bentley stopped in front of the estate one October morning, when the leaves on the apple trees were beginning to turn golden, and the air already carried the presage of autumn. From it descended a tall, slender woman in her 70s, dressed entirely in black, with a pearl necklace that contrasted with her pale skin, and a severe bun that tensed her aristocratic features. "Mrs. Vivian," murmured Martha, visibly paling when she looked out the window. "The master's mother." Eleanor felt her stomach contract. In 6 months of marriage, she had never met her mother-in-law. She knew from occasional comments that she lived in New York and rarely visited California due to health problems. Vivian Caldwell Blackwell entered the estate as if she owned the place, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor with the precision of a metronome. Her eyes, the same amber color as Griffin's but infinitely colder, scanned Eleanor from head to toe. "So you're my son's new wife," she said without preamble, extending a hand with perfectly manicured nails. It wasn't a question but a statement laden with barely disguised skepticism. "Welcome, Mrs. Blackwell," Eleanor responded, striving to maintain her composure. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "How polite," commented Vivian with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Griffin mentioned you came from a good family, albeit fallen on hard times. The Harringtons from New Hampshire, isn't that right? I knew your grandfather in the 70s, a brilliant man but with a lamentable taste for investments." The comment, designed to establish hierarchies from the first moment, hit Eleanor like a gloved slap. Before she could respond, Griffin appeared in the doorway, alerted by Martha of the unexpected arrival. "Mother," he said, his voice recovering that professional coldness that had begun to soften in recent weeks. "We weren't expecting you." "Evidently," Vivian replied, kissing her son on both cheeks, "but after your call about the possible merger with Coastal Hotels, I decided to come personally. Some matters require family discretion." Lunch was an exercise in contained tension. Seated in the main dining room beneath the imposing portrait of Griffin's father, a man with a penetrating gaze who had amassed a fortune in construction before losing it all to gambling, the three maintained a superficial conversation about New York, the weather, politics. But during dessert, while the taste of the meal turned bitter in her mouth, Vivian showed her true intentions. "Griffin tells me he's involved you in some social events," she said, looking at Eleanor with that cutting smile. "It's brave of him, considering your youth and inexperience." "Eleanor has conducted herself admirably," Griffin responded with a firmness that surprised both women. Vivian waved her bejeweled hand as if shooing an insignificant fly. "I'm sure she has. You've always been indulgent with your emotional investments." She made a calculated pause before adding, "as you were with Sophia." The forbidden name fell on the table like a stone in a pond, creating waves of tension that expanded in all directions. Eleanor felt as if she couldn't breathe. "Don't compare situations that have nothing to do with each other, Mother," Griffin warned, his voice dangerously controlled. "Nothing to do with each other?" Vivian arched a perfect eyebrow. "Her young wife dazzled by your position, who will probably also abandon you when she finds something more exciting." She turned to Eleanor, her gaze sharp as a scalpel. "No offense, dear, but history has an unfortunate tendency to repeat itself." The words cut deeply, especially because they echoed Eleanor's own secret fears, not being enough, not measuring up, being just a temporary replacement. "I think I need some air," she said, rising abruptly. "If you'll excuse me." She went out to the apple orchard, where the citrus aroma usually calmed her, but this time, not even that familiar fragrance could appease the storm of emotions invading her. Vivian's insinuations had touched a sensitive fiber, the persistent doubt about her place in Griffin's life. Was she just an attempt to rebuild what he had lost? A more manageable, more docile version, less prone to abandoning him? And what if one day she discovered, like Sophia, that this life wasn't enough? The afternoon gave way to twilight, and twilight to night. The stars began to appear in the sky like silver tears. Seated on the stone bench beneath the apple trees, Eleanor allowed tears to flow freely for the first time since the wedding. It was then that Griffin found her. Without saying a word, he sat beside her. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable, as if both understood that there are moments when words are insufficient. Finally, with a voice hoarse from contained emotion, he confessed, "I'm afraid to love again. Afraid that if I allow myself to feel, I'll be abandoned once more. Sophia left when I most believed in us. She said I was boring, that my life was monotonous. That's why I made that promise on our wedding night, not to protect you from me, but to protect myself from feeling." The vulnerability of his confession was a gift Eleanor hadn't expected. In that moment, under the starry mantle of the California night, she saw the complete man, not the successful businessman or the distant husband, but the human being with his fears, his scars, his repressed yearning for connection. "I'm afraid too," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Afraid of not being enough, of living in the shadow of a memory, of discovering one day that this marriage is just a convenient transaction for both of us." Griffin took her hand gently, as he had done after the ball at the Fairmont. This time, however, the gesture was charged with a new intimacy. "Perhaps we're both too busy looking at the past and the future, and we forget that life happens in the present, in small moments like this." Eleanor nodded, feeling that something fundamental was transforming between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but a mutual recognition of vulnerability, a silent pact to begin anew, this time without the shadows of the past dictating the present. "Will your mother stay long?" she asked, trying to lighten the moment. For the first time, she saw a genuine smile illuminate Griffin's face. "I've booked her on the first flight to New York tomorrow morning. Some emotional investments, as she says, deserve to be protected." They returned to the estate together, walking closer than usual, their silhouettes outlined against the full moon that bathed the vineyards in silver. Neither mentioned the conversation at dinner, nor Vivian's insinuations. It wasn't necessary. Something had changed between them, a seed planted that with time and care could become something beautiful. That night, before retiring to their separate rooms, Griffin stopped in front of Eleanor's door. "Good night," he said, and for an instant it seemed he was going to add something more. Instead, he softly caressed her cheek with the back of his fingers, a gesture as ephemeral as it was moving. "Rest well." Eleanor closed her bedroom door, her heart beating with a new cadence. She caressed her cheek where his fingers had been, feeling something awakening inside her, something that went beyond duty or convenience, something dangerously close to desire. Sometimes we need someone to question our certainties to discover our true doubts. And in those doubts, paradoxically, we find the seed of new certainties, more authentic and deeper than the previous ones. The following months brought a gradual transformation. 8 months into the marriage, Eleanor discovered an unexpected facet of herself when Griffin, almost casually, invited her to accompany him to a meeting of the charitable foundation he had created to help children from Hunters Point, one of the most disadvantaged neighborhoods in San Francisco. "I don't expect you to participate actively," he told her, while they had breakfast under the pergola, where the wisteria created a purple shade over the table. "I just thought you might be interested to see this part of my work." Eleanor, who had begun to appreciate these shared breakfasts, a new habit since Vivian's visit, accepted with curiosity. "I'd love to. I've always been interested in social work, although in New Hampshire I never had the opportunity to really get involved." The meeting was held at the central offices of Blackwell Hotels in downtown San Francisco, a historic building renovated with exquisite taste that combined traditional American elements with contemporary design. Eleanor observed with fascination how Griffin, usually reserved, transformed when speaking about the Foundation's projects. His eyes shone with a passion he rarely showed, and his voice acquired warm tones she had only heard on counted occasions. "The scholarship program has allowed 15 young people to access university education this year," he explained to the board of directors, composed mainly of executives from his hotels and some notable San Franciscans. "But we need to expand our reach. There's extraordinary talent being wasted due to lack of opportunities." During the coffee break, Eleanor approached Marianne Collins, the Foundation's executive director, a woman in her 50s with contagious energy. "What you've accomplished is impressive," Eleanor commented sincerely. "How do you select the scholarship recipients?" Marianne looked at her with renewed interest, as if until that moment she had considered her simply the wife of. "We have a system of interviews and tests, but we lack structure. The problem is we lose excellent candidates because many don't even apply. They lack confidence in themselves." "Have you considered approaching the schools directly?" suggested Eleanor. "Perhaps if teachers identified the potential and acted as initial mentors." The conversation continued animatedly, and when the meeting resumed, Eleanor was surprised when Griffin asked her to share her ideas with the rest of the team. With a mixture of nervousness and enthusiasm, she presented her proposal for a mentoring program that would connect each scholarship recipient with a professional in the sector that interested them. At the end of the meeting, Griffin looked at her with an expression she had never seen before: authentic pride. "You have a natural gift for this," he said, as they returned to the estate in the car. "Your proposal was the most innovative we've heard in months." Eleanor felt a warmth expand in her chest. It wasn't Griffin's approval that moved her, though she certainly wasn't indifferent to it, but the sensation of having found something that truly passionate her. "I'd like to get more involved," she confessed. "If that's all right with you, of course." Griffin took a curve smoothly before responding. "The Foundation has always been my personal project, something separate from the hotels, something mine, but I think I'd like it to be ours." The weight of that ours floated between them like a promise. It wasn't just an invitation to collaborate in the Foundation, but a step toward sharing something deeper. The following weeks were intense and revealing. Eleanor began working at the Foundation 3 days a week, developing the mentoring program and organizing a fundraising event. Griffin observed her with growing admiration, discovering that his young wife wasn't just beautiful and kind, she was strategic and determined. Seeing her negotiate with suppliers, convince potential donors, and win the trust of distrustful teenagers from Hunter's Point, awakened something in him that had been dormant. The fundraising event, held in the gardens of the Blackwell Hotel San Francisco under the stars of an early summer night, was a resounding success. Eleanor had transformed the traditional and rigid format of a charity gala into an immersive experience where the scholarship recipients themselves showed their talents and projects, connecting directly with the donors. "Your wife is extraordinary," Jonathan Preston commented to Griffin, as they observed Eleanor chatting animatedly with the mayor and an important tech entrepreneur. "She's managed to get me to donate twice what I had initially planned." Griffin nodded, his gaze fixed on her, dazzling in a midnight blue dress that enhanced the natural grace of her movements. "She is," he responded simply, feeling a pride that went beyond the professional. But when they completed a year of marriage, a greater obstacle arose. The merger proposal with Coastal Hotels, which Griffin had been negotiating for months, finally took concrete form with an inescapable condition: his presence in New York for at least 6 months to oversee the integration of both companies. The news fell like a bucket of cold water during the breakfast they now habitually shared. 6 months is a long time," said Eleanor, feeling a knot in her stomach at the prospect of separation. now that they were finally building something significant. "I know," Griffin responded, rubbing his temples. "But this merger means expanding internationally. It's the opportunity I've been waiting for years." "I understand." Eleanor stirred her coffee with milk, processing the information. "When would you have to leave?" "In 3 weeks." The silence that followed was charged with unexpressed emotions. The separation seemed unbearable now that they were finally growing closer. During the heated discussion about the trip, where the aroma of strong coffee filled the morning air, Eleanor surprised them both by declaring, "I'll go with you." Griffin looked at her with amazement. "Are you serious? You'd leave the foundation?" "The estate?" "The foundation has Marianne and the estate has Martha. Both are perfectly capable." A genuine smile illuminated Griffin's usually serious face. "Nothing would please me more than having you with me in New York, but—" He paused, and his expression became more serious. "If you come, I don't want it to be as my companion. I want you to actively participate in the merger process." Eleanor felt a mixture of excitement and panic. "Griffin, I know nothing about hotel mergers. I've barely been at the foundation for a few months. You learn quickly, and you have something many of my executives lack: intuition for people and mediation capacity." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "But I have one condition. You would need to learn to manage part of the business for the trip to be productive." The proposal was as unexpected as it was challenging. Was he really offering her a role in his company, the core of his life, something he hadn't even shared with Sophia? "Why?" asked Eleanor, needing to understand his motivations. Griffin looked at her for a long time before responding. "Because in this year, I've discovered that you're much more than you appear, and because for the first time in a long time, I trust someone enough to share what I've built." Trust. That simple but powerful word resonated in Eleanor's heart. Beyond the physical desire that had begun to arise between them, beyond even the mutual respect they had developed, trust was the bridge that could truly unite their worlds. "I accept the challenge," she finally said, extending her hand across the table. Griffin took it, sealing a pact that went far beyond the professional. "New York," he said, with a spark in his eyes she had never seen. Together. The following 3 months were intense. Eleanor studied contracts, attended meetings, learned about hotel management. The obstacles were enormous: the distrust of Griffin's partners, her own inexperience, and the internal voices saying she wasn't capable. But each small victory, negotiating a better discount with a specialty coffee supplier from Oregon, resolving a customer complaint with elegance, proposing an innovation in the breakfast service, came with the cost of sleepless nights and constant doubts. "What if I disappoint you?" she asked one night, while they reviewed the financial reports for the last quarter in Griffin's study. It was no longer a forbidden space, but a shared territory where they spent hours working side by side. Griffin looked up from the documents, his eyes tired but warm. "That's not possible. I'm serious, Griffin. I'm entering your world, a world you've built alone for decades. What if I'm not up to it?" He removed his reading glasses and set them on the table. Then, in a gesture that had become more frequent but no less electrifying, he took her hand. "Eleanor, when I proposed this marriage, I was seeking stability, respectability, perhaps occasional companionship. I never imagined I'd find a partner, a confidant, someone who would see potential where others only see obstacles." He paused, his fingers intertwined with hers. "I don't fear that you'll disappoint me. I fear that one day you'll discover, like Sophia, that this life isn't enough for you." The naked honesty of his confession left Eleanor speechless. In that moment, under the dim light of his desk lamp, with the aroma of old books and fresh coffee floating in the air, something crystallized within her. It wasn't compassion or gratitude she felt for this complex and vulnerable man. It was something deeper, more authentic, something dangerously close to love. "New York will just be the beginning," she said, squeezing his hand in response. "We're building something together, Griffin, something that's ours, not just yours or mine." That night, as the full moon bathed the estate with its silver light, Eleanor understood she had passed the first great test. She had found her place in Griffin's world, not as a guest or a substitute, but as an equal. New York, with its challenges and opportunities, would be the second test, one they would face together step by step, building not just a business empire, but perhaps something much more valuable, a true marriage based on trust, respect, and a feeling that was growing between them as silent but persistent as the century-old vines that surrounded the estate. There are moments in life when we must choose between the security of the known and the vertigo of the possible. It's at these crossroads where we discover not only what we're made of, but also who we can become if we dare to take the leap of faith toward the unknown. During that period of intense preparation for New York, something unexpected shook the foundations of the world Eleanor and Griffin were building together. Vivian returned, this time not just with her usual disdain, but with disturbing news. "The estate is in danger," she announced without preamble during a dinner Eleanor had specially prepared to try to ingratiate herself with her mother-in-law. The aroma of the prime rib filled the dining room, mixing with Vivian's excessively sweet perfume. "What are you talking about, Mother?" asked Griffin, setting his glass of red wine on the white linen tablecloth. Vivian extracted a manila envelope with legal documents from her Hermes bag. "The Montgomerys have filed a lawsuit. They claim part of these lands belong to them by right, according to a document from the Depression era they've just discovered in the state archives." The news fell like a bomb. The Montgomerys were an old aristocratic family fallen from grace who had sold these lands to Griffin's father in the 60s. If their claim prospered, they could lose not only a significant part of the vineyard, but possibly the entire estate. "This is absurd," exclaimed Griffin, examining the documents with a furrowed brow. "The purchase and sale was completely legal." Vivian waved a bejeweled hand. "Legal, according to the documents we had. But apparently, your father wasn't completely scrupulous in his business dealings." The tension in Griffin's face was palpable. The estate wasn't just a property, it was his refuge, the place where he had grown up, the only space where he truly allowed himself to be vulnerable. "There's one more thing," added Vivian, looking directly at Eleanor with steely eyes. "The judge assigned to the case is Henry Walsh, an old friend of the Montgomery family." "Bribery," murmured Griffin, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Not necessarily," his mother responded, "but let's say we'll need all the influence possible. And this is where your marriage comes into play." Eleanor, who until then had observed the exchange in silence, felt her stomach contract. "I don't understand what our marriage has to do with this legal dispute." Vivian smiled with that expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Judge Walsh is a traditionalist. He firmly believes in family as an institution. The Montgomerys know this and will argue that Griffin acquired the estate through a strategic marriage to increase his assets." "That's ridiculous," protested Eleanor. "We married long after Griffin inherited the estate, but you could lose it if you don't prove that your marriage is legitimate and motivated by genuine love." Vivian pronounced the word love as if it were a contagious disease. "The court will especially value testimonies about the nature of your relationship." The revelation was devastating because it exposed an uncomfortable truth. The marriage had begun as an arrangement, officially registered, but without the effective proofs they now desperately needed. That night, after Vivian retired to her room, Griffin found Eleanor in the library, contemplating the fireplace with an absent expression. "I'm sorry," he said, sitting beside her on the worn leather sofa. "I shouldn't have involved you in this mess." Eleanor looked at him, surprised by the guilt in his voice. "It's not your fault. No one could have foreseen this. My father always had enemies. I should have imagined that one day they would return to claim their revenge." He paused, contemplating the dancing flames. "The estate means a lot to me, more than any hotel or business." "I know," she responded softly. "It's your home, the only place where I've seen you truly at peace." Griffin looked at her with an intensity that shook her to the core. "Now it's your home too, Eleanor, and I'll do whatever necessary to protect it. Even if it means pretending our marriage is something it's not," she asked, the question escaping her lips before she could contain it. The silence that followed was dense, laden with unexpressed implications. Finally, Griffin responded in a low voice. "And what exactly is our marriage, Eleanor? Is it still just a convenient agreement for both of us?" The question left her breathless. What were they now? Partners? Friends? Something more that neither dared to name? "I don't know," she confessed honestly. "I know we're no longer the strangers we were a year ago. I know I trust you, as I've never trusted anyone." And I know that the idea of losing you or this life we've built, seems unbearable to me. Griffin took her hand, a gesture that had become familiar but never less electrifying. Then perhaps we wouldn't be pretending after all. Their eyes met in the reddish penumbra of the library, and for a moment Eleanor believed he was going to kiss her. But the moment passed, leaving only the tacit promise of something not yet ready to fully blossom. "What will we do?" she asked, returning to the reality of the problem they faced. "First, postpone New York," he responded with determination. "This battle is more important. Afterward," his voice softened, "afterward, we'll need to build a credible story about our marriage, one that convinces the judge and anyone who testifies." "Lie, you mean?" Griffin shook his head. "No, Eleanor. Show the truth that exists, albeit perhaps not in the traditional form. Demonstrate that this marriage, despite its unconventional beginnings, has become something real." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Griffin cancelled the preparations for New York, explaining to his partners that an urgent family matter required his presence in California. The lawyers came and went from the estate with briefcases full of yellowed documents and complex legal arguments. But the hardest blow came when one of the lawyers, after thoroughly reviewing the case, communicated his professional opinion. "You'll need testimonies from family members and friends who can attest that your marriage is authentic. Photographs of trips together, romantic correspondence, any evidence of a genuine relationship." "We've barely left the estate together," murmured Eleanor, feeling panic take hold of her. "And our correspondence is limited to notes about the foundation and the business." The lawyer, an older man with understanding eyes behind his gold-rimmed glasses, nodded gravely. "That's precisely the problem, Mrs. Blackwell. To outside eyes, your marriage appears exactly what the Montgomerys will allege, an arrangement of convenience." When the lawyer left, Griffin and Eleanor remained alone in the study, the weight of reality crushing them. Everything they had built, the mutual trust, the respect, the professional complicity, might not be enough in the eyes of a court. "We need proof," Griffin finally said, his voice tense. "Tangible proof of feelings we're just beginning to recognize ourselves." Eleanor felt something breaking inside her. It wasn't just the threat of losing the estate. It was the cruelty of having to quantify and demonstrate something as delicate as the feelings that had blossomed between them. "What do you suggest?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure. Griffin looked at her for a long time before responding. "A trip. Not to escape, but to build the proof the court demands. We'll visit places important to me. You'll meet people from my past. We'll create memories no one can question." The proposal was both practical and profoundly intimate. They weren't simply fabricating evidence. They were accelerating a process of mutual knowledge that, under normal circumstances, would have taken years. "When would we leave?" she asked, surprising herself with the anticipation she felt. "Tomorrow itself, if possible," he responded, a new urgency in his voice. "Each day counts." That night, as she packed her suitcase, Eleanor reflected on the irony of her situation. A year ago, she had married a stranger out of family convenience. Now she had to prove this marriage was authentic, precisely when she was beginning to feel it could be. Looking out the window at the vineyard silvered by the moon, she wondered if this trip forced by circumstances would be the catalyst that would finally break down the last barriers between them, or if the pressure of pretending a love that was just being born would end up suffocating its fragile flame. There are wounds that never completely heal, invisible cracks in the soul that make us vulnerable just when we most need to be strong. But sometimes it's precisely these wounds that allow us to truly connect with another human being, when both find the courage to show our scars and discover that despite them, or perhaps because of them, we are worthy of being loved. At 15 months of marriage, Eleanor and Griffin embarked on a journey neither had anticipated. It wasn't a late honeymoon, as they commented to curious neighbors, but an expedition into Griffin's past to build the evidence the court demanded, and perhaps also to finish intertwining their lives in a way no legal document could capture. The first destination was Lexington, a small historic town in Massachusetts, where Griffin had spent the summers of his childhood in his paternal grandmother's house. The Tesla climbed winding roads between sugar maples and oaks, while the landscape became increasingly wild and beautiful. "My mother sent me here every summer," Griffin explained as he drove, his hands relaxed on the wheel, so different from the tense executive Eleanor had initially met. She cleaned houses in Palo Alto and couldn't take care of me during school vacations. Did you like coming? Asked Eleanor, fascinated by these snippets of his past he rarely shared. A nostalgic smile softened Griffin's features. At first I hated it. I was a city boy used to the noise of San Francisco. But Grandma Elaine had a special way of making simplicity seem like a treasure. She taught me to recognize bird songs, to find mushrooms among the fallen leaves, to feel the change in the wind before a storm. Lexington welcomed them with its labyrinth of cobblestone streets and window boxes overflowing with red geraniums. In the small main square under the shade of a golden stone church, several elderly men played checkers. One of them looked up and his weathered face lit with recognition. Griffin Blackwell, by all the saints. The man, who must have been over 80, rose with difficulty and embraced Griffin with a familiarity that surprised Eleanor. She had never seen her husband accept such spontaneous physical contact. "Mr. Thomas," Griffin smiled, "you're still as strong as when you taught me to fish in the river. And you're still as skinny as then despite all your money," laughed the old man, giving him an affectionate pat. His eyes, lively under bushy eyebrows, turned to Eleanor. "And who is this lovely lady?" "My wife, Eleanor," Griffin responded, placing a hand on the small of her back in a protective and possessive gesture that sent a shiver up her spine. "Finally settled down, boy," exclaimed Mr. Thomas, kissing Eleanor's cheeks with immediate affection. "Come, Martha will be delighted to meet you." They were led to a whitewashed house with blue doors, where an elderly woman welcomed them with hugs and a table already prepared for lunch, as if she had instinctively known they would come. The aroma of pot roast and freshly baked bread filled the kitchen. "I always knew you'd find someone special," Martha said to Griffin, while serving homemade wine in simple glasses. "Someone who would see beyond the businessman." Eleanor noticed how Griffin avoided mentioning this was his second marriage. Here, in this remote town where time seemed to have stood still, he was simply the boy who had grown to become a successful man, but continued returning to his roots. During lunch she heard stories that painted a completely different Griffin than the one she knew. The boy who saved an abandoned dog and hid it in the barn for an entire summer. The teenager who worked picking apples to buy books. The young man who promised his dying grandmother he would never forget where he came from, no matter how far he went. "Do you have photos from that time?" Eleanor asked Mr. Thomas, remembering the practical purpose of their trip. The old man nodded and disappeared to return with a worn album. Griffin groaned, visibly uncomfortable, as Eleanor turned pages that revealed a skinny boy with serious eyes, a gangly teenager with a furrowed brow, a young man with a determined gaze. "Look," Martha pointed out a particular photograph. His first communion. His mother sold a ring from her own mother to buy him that suit. Eleanor observed the image with a heavy heart. Griffin, about 8 years old, with a suit too large for him, and a solemn expression that seemed inappropriate for a child. Beside him, a young and beautiful woman, despite her evident exhaustion, with a hand resting on her son's shoulder and a gaze of fierce pride. "Your mother was very beautiful," Eleanor commented softly. "And strong, like few others," added Mr. Thomas. "After your father lost everything to gambling and abandoned you, she swore you would have the education you deserved. She worked in 3 different houses to pay for your school." Griffin remained silent, his jaw tense. It was evident that these stories, although familiar to him, had never been shared with Sophia or anyone else. Eleanor understood then the gift he was giving her, access to the roots of his identity, to the vulnerable boy who became the complex man who was now her husband. With Mr. Thomas and Martha's permission, they photographed some of the most significant images from the album. They also took new photographs together in the square, in front of Griffin's childhood home, on the bank of the small river where he had learned to fish. Evidence for the court, yes, but also authentic memories they were building together. That night they stayed in a small inn with views of the mountains. Their rooms, although separate, were connected by a shared balcony where they sat to observe the stars after dinner. The silence between them was comfortable, full of unexpressed reflections. "Thank you for sharing all this with me," Eleanor finally said, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet of the mountain night. Griffin turned his face to her, the moonlight silvering his features. "I've never shown this to anyone, not even to Sophia," she completed when he broke off. "Why?" He remained silent for so long that Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he sighed deeply. I suppose I was afraid she would see the poor boy from the city and not the successful businessman she had chosen, or worse, that she would feel pity. I don't feel pity, Eleanor affirmed firmly. I feel admiration for the boy who survived so much and became the man you are today. Griffin extended his hand across the small table that separated them, and she intertwined her fingers with his. The contact was so natural now, as necessary as breathing. Tomorrow we'll go to the coast, he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. There's a special place I want to show you. The second destination of their journey was a small town on the Northern California coast, where the smell of the sea mingled with the scent of pines from the nearby hills. Griffin took her to a tiny cove hidden from the tourist circuit, accessible only after a hike down a steep trail. I discovered this place when I was 17, he explained as they descended to the virgin beach. I had come to work as a waiter during the summer and escaped here during my free hours to study. The cove was perfect, a semicircle of golden sand embraced by cliffs of reddish rock, with crystalline waters that shimmered in turquoise hues under the afternoon sun. It's beautiful, sighed Eleanor, removing her shoes to feel the warm sand beneath her feet. Here I decided I would build my first hotel, Griffin revealed, pointing toward the horizon. Looking at that infinite sea, I swore that someday I would create places where people could feel as at peace as I felt in this cove. They walked along the shore, letting the waves lap at their bare feet. Griffin told her about his early years as a businessman, the denied loans, the sleepless nights, the failures that preceded his successes. He spoke of his first hotel, a modest building on the outskirts of San Francisco that was now the headquarters of his empire. At sunset, with the sky tinged orange and purple, they sat on the sand to contemplate the setting sun. The rhythmic sound of the waves created a natural intimacy between them. When I bought the estate, said Griffin, his voice mixing with the murmur of the sea, I thought I had finally found my place in the world, a place of my own, far from the tiny apartment where I grew up, far from memories of deprivation. But over the years I understood that a place, no matter how beautiful, is just an empty shell if there's no one to share it with. Eleanor felt her heart accelerate. Is that why you married Sophia? He nodded slowly. I believed she would fill that void. She was brilliant, passionate, so different from the traditional women of San Francisco. But for her, the estate was a prison. She always wanted to be somewhere else. New York, Los Angeles, Paris, always seeking something I couldn't give her. What was it? Asked Eleanor softly. Griffin smiled sadly. Freedom, I suppose. The same freedom I found in the estate, in its open spaces, in the silence of the vineyards, she sought in cities, in art galleries, in endless parties. He paused, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun was beginning to sink. We loved each other but never found a shared rhythm, a place where both of us could breathe together. The confession floated between them like a seagull over the waves. Eleanor understood then why that marriage had failed. It wasn't just that Sophia had found another man, but that she had never found peace in the life Griffin offered her. And now? She asked, her voice barely audible over the murmur of the sea. Have you found that shared rhythm with me? Griffin turned his face to her, and the intensity of his gaze shook her to the marrow. We're building it, Eleanor, day by day. In the foundation, in the business, in each shared breakfast, in each conversation under the orchard trees. And for the first time in my life, I'm not in a hurry. I don't need to force it. The sun finally sank beneath the horizon, leaving behind a purple glow that slowly gave way to darkness studded with stars. The temperature began to drop, and Griffin placed his jacket over Eleanor's shoulders in a protective gesture. It was then, with bare feet in the still warm sand and the sound of waves breaking rhythmically against the shore, that Eleanor finally pronounced the words that would change everything. I want to. Griffin understood immediately. It wasn't about the arranged marriage or legal obligations. It was about choice. The choice to give herself completely to this love that had grown slowly, like the vines that need years of California sun to bear fruit. They looked into each other's eyes in the growing twilight, the entire universe contained in that silent exchange. Slowly, as if afraid to break a spell, Griffin brought his face to hers. The kiss was witnessed only by the seagulls and the starry sky. Timid at first, then urgent, laden with 18 months of restraint, respect, and repressed desire. his hands tangled in her hair, while Eleanor clung to his shoulders as if fearing he might vanish. When they separated, both had tears in their eyes. He from relief at having allowed himself to love again, she from joy at having found not just a husband, but a partner who had respected each step of her journey. "I love you, Eleanor," Griffin whispered against her lips, the words as natural as the sea breeze caressing their faces. "Not because we need proof for the court, not because you're my wife on paper, but because you've transformed my life in ways I never believed possible." "I love you too," she responded, her voice broken with emotion, "for the man you are, with your scars and your strengths, for respecting my space and my time, for allowing me to discover you and discover myself in the process." They stayed on the beach until the first stars covered the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They talked as never before, sharing fears and hopes, dreams and memories. And when they finally returned to their small inn by the sea, they did so hand in hand, like two people who had found their home in each other. That night, in a simple room illuminated by moonlight filtering through the curtains, they consummated a marriage that had begun as a contract and had transformed into a conscious choice, into a love built with patience, respect, and the courage to be vulnerable. And as the night progressed amid whispers and caresses, both understood that the best love stories aren't those that happen instantly, but those cultivated with time, trust, and the willingness to see the other as they are, complete in their imperfection. Sometimes the longest path is the only one that leads us to the right destination, and on that journey, it's not speed that matters, but the intention of each step, the beauty of each landscape, the sincerity of each shared word. Because true love isn't found, it's built like a house with firm foundations that can withstand all storms. Back in California, with a new intimacy flowing between them like an underground current, Eleanor and Griffin faced the reality of the approaching trial. They had collected photographs, emotional testimonies from Griffin's childhood friends, tangible evidence of their shared journey. But both knew that the real change, the transformation of their relationship, was something too precious and personal to be exhibited in a court of law. "I'm afraid," Eleanor confessed one night, as they reviewed the legal strategy with their lead attorney in Griffin's study. It was no longer a forbidden space, but the professional heart of their shared life. "Afraid our feelings will be judged, questioned, reduced to circumstantial evidence." The attorney, Mr. Harrison, a 60-year-old man with an impeccable reputation in California legal circles, looked at them over his reading glasses. "Judge Walsh is a perceptive man. He's not impressed by appearances, but by authenticity. The key will be to show him not just that you're legally married, but that you're a true couple, with shared projects, overcome conflicts, a history built together." "But our marriage began as an arrangement," Eleanor insisted, always honest. "Won't that be used against us?" Mr. Harrison smiled with wisdom accumulated over decades of practice. "Mrs. Blackwell, do you know how many marriages in America, even today, begin as arrangements? What matters isn't how a union begins, but what it becomes. And you have something many couples who marry for passionate love never develop, a genuine partnership, mutual respect, shared goals." Griffin, who had remained thoughtful during the conversation, took Eleanor's hand on the mahogany desk. It was a gesture he now made naturally, without the reserve of previous months. "Harrison is right," he said, his eyes finding hers. "What we have now is real. If the court can't see that, then perhaps we don't deserve to keep the estate." "Are you serious?" asked Eleanor, surprised. "You've always said the estate is your refuge, your true home." Griffin gently squeezed her hand. "I've discovered that home isn't a place, Eleanor. It's a person. It's wherever we are together." The words, pronounced with such simplicity but laden with meaning, caused Eleanor's eyes to fill with tears. Even Mr. Harrison, accustomed to the emotional stratagems of his clients, seemed moved by the sincerity of the moment. The weeks leading up to the trial were intense. Life on the estate took on a new rhythm, as if the external threat had crystallized something essential between them. They worked together during the day, she at the foundation, he managing his hotels, and at night they shared not just the bed, but also dreams, fears, and plans for a future they now truly imagined together. Marianne, the foundation director, was one of the first to notice the change. "There's something different about you two," she commented during a meeting about the new scholarship program, a synchrony that didn't exist before. "We've learned to dance together," Eleanor responded with a smile, exchanging a complicit look with Griffin. Martha, always observant, also perceived the transformation. One morning, while serving breakfast on the veranda where they now invariably ate together, the old housekeeper permitted herself an unusually personal comment. "Mr. Griffin, I've never seen you smile so much as since you returned from your trip." "I have reasons to smile, Martha," he responded, his hand instinctively seeking Eleanor's on the table. Even Vivian, who returned to California for the trial, noticed the change, though her reaction was more complex. "You seem different," she observed one afternoon, finding Eleanor in the garden where she now shared a fondness for gardening with Griffin. "More confident, less the frightened girl I met." "I'm no longer afraid, Vivian," Eleanor responded with a tranquility that surprised them both. "Not of you, not of the future, not of my own feelings." Griffin's mother studied her with those amber eyes so similar to her son's. "Do you truly love him?" she finally asked, without preamble. "With all my heart," Eleanor responded without hesitation. "Not as I imagined love would be when I was a child, with fireworks and uncontrolled passion, but with something deeper and more lasting, with knowledge, with acceptance, with the certainty that we are better together than apart." Vivian remained silent for a long time, her gaze lost among the century-old vines that surrounded the estate. Finally, with a vulnerability Eleanor had never seen in her, she confessed, "His father and I never had that. We married for convenience, like you, but where you built bridges, we dug trenches." The confession, as unexpected as it was revealing, allowed Eleanor to see her mother-in-law in a new light. She wasn't just the cold and calculating matriarch she had met, but a woman who had suffered her own failed marriage, who had seen her son repeat the pattern with Sophia, and who feared another failure. "We're not you," Eleanor said softly, touching the older woman's arm voluntarily for the first time. "Nor are we Griffin and Sophia. We're something new, something we're building day by day." The eve of the trial, as the sunset tinged the white walls of the estate gold, Griffin led Eleanor to a place she had never visited, the locked wing of the estate, the quarters he had once shared with Sophia. With slightly trembling hands, he turned the key in the antique lock and opened the heavy wooden door. The aroma of mustiness and dried lavender greeted Eleanor as they entered what had been the master bedroom of the previous marriage. "I haven't entered here in years," Griffin confessed, his voice laden with contained emotions. "After Sophia left, I ordered this wing closed and untouched. Not in hope she would return, as some thought, but because I couldn't bear the memories. The room, frozen in time, showed evidence of an interrupted life, art books on the shelves, French perfumes on the vanity, a forgotten silk dress in the half-open closet. It was like a museum of a failed love preserved in amber. "Why are you bringing me here now?" asked Eleanor, feeling a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Griffin breathed deeply, as if gathering strength. "Because tomorrow we'll defend our marriage in court, and I can't do that honestly while maintaining this sanctuary to a past that no longer defines me." He turned to her, taking her hands in his. "I want this wing renovated, transformed. I want it to be ours, not a monument to what I lost, but a symbol of what we've found together." The proposal was more than a change of decoration. It was a symbolic act of closure, of opening to a new chapter. Eleanor felt the weight and honor of what Griffin was offering her, the opportunity to finally exorcise the ghosts that had overshadowed the beginning of their relationship. "I'm ready," she responded, squeezing his hands, "for this and for whatever comes tomorrow." That night, for the first time, they slept in the master bedroom they now shared, not in the separate rooms of the beginning or the alternative bedroom they had used since returning from their trip. It was another step in their shared path, a silent declaration that, whatever happened in court, their union was real and consciously chosen. The day of the trial dawned with a sky of intense blue, as if California wanted to show its best face. The San Francisco courthouse, a neoclassical building in the historic center, received them with the solemnity proper to institutions where destinies are decided. In the courtroom, decorated with austere dark wood panels and presided over by a crucified Christ, all the actors in this drama gathered. The Montgomerys, former owners claiming the estate, with their lawyers in impeccable suits. Mr. Harrison and his legal team, armed with folders full of documents and evidence, Vivian elegant and tense in the front row, and finally Eleanor and Griffin, holding hands, facing together whatever was to come. Judge Walsh turned out to be a man in his 60s, with completely white hair and perceptive eyes behind metal-rimmed glasses. His reputation as a traditionalist was evident in the meticulous way he conducted the session, in his insistence on protocol, in the occasional citations of legal principles from another time. The Montgomerys' lawyers presented their case first. Old documents, testimonies from distant relatives, arguments about the validity of transactions made during the Depression. Then came the defense's turn, with Mr. Harrison masterfully presenting the legal history of the estate, the good faith in all transactions, and finally the central argument, that the current owner's marriage demonstrated their commitment to the land and their legitimate right to keep it. It was then that the real examination began. Judge Walsh, looking directly at Eleanor and Griffin, requested that both testify about the nature of their marriage. "Mrs. Blackwell," he began, his grave voice filling the silent room, "I understand that you married Mr. Blackwell approximately a year and a half ago. Could you explain to the court how you met and what led you to contract matrimony?" Eleanor breathed deeply. She had rehearsed this moment, prepared strategic responses with Mr. Harrison, but looking at the judge she decided that only the truth, however uncomfortable, would be enough. "We met through our families, Your Honor. A traditional arrangement, like many in America." She paused, aware of the murmur that ran through the room. "I married Griffin without really knowing him, accepting an agreement that economically benefited my family and provided him with a respectable wife for his social commitments." The judge raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised by the frankness. "Please continue." "On our wedding night, Griffin made me an extraordinary promise. He said he wouldn't touch me until I wanted him to." Eleanor briefly looked at her husband, finding strength in his eyes. "At that moment, I didn't understand what it truly meant. Now I know it was the greatest act of respect and love anyone has ever offered me. He gave me time, space, and freedom to know him, to discover the man behind the businessman, to choose if I wanted to be with him, not out of obligation, but by my own decision." As Eleanor narrated their story, the first months of distance, the small gestures that built trust, her work at the foundation, the journey that transformed their relationship, the room remained in absolute silence. It wasn't the conventional romantic story many expected, but it had an undeniable authenticity. "And now," the judge finally asked, "how would you describe your current marriage?" Eleanor smiled, a serene smile that illuminated her face. "Like a home we've built together, Your Honor. Not with bricks and mortar, but with respect, trust, and a love that has grown slowly like the century-old vines that surround the estate. We didn't marry in love, it's true, but we're in love now deeply, in a way that's only possible when you consciously choose to love someone, knowing their strengths and weaknesses." When it was Griffin's turn, his testimony complemented Eleanor's, adding his own perspective on the transformation of their relationship. He spoke with unusual frankness about his fear of abandonment after the experience with Sophia, about how Eleanor had renewed his faith in the possibility of a genuine connection, about the way she had brought not just warmth to his personal life, but also a fresh vision to his professional projects. "The estate," he concluded, "isn't just a property to me, Your Honor. It's the setting where I've learned, thanks to Eleanor, that second chances are possible, that imperfect beginnings can lead to something beautiful, that the value of land isn't in the documents that accredit its ownership, but in the lives built upon it." After the testimonies, they presented the evidence collected during their journey, photographs with Griffin's old friends, images of them in significant places from his past, letters and recent emails that showed the nature of their collaboration in the foundation and the business. Marianne testified about the transformation she had observed in both of them. Martha spoke with tears in her eyes about how the estate had gone from being a somber place to a home full of life. Even Vivian, surprising everyone, offered an emotional testimony about the change she had seen in her son, a man who has finally found not just a wife, but a life partner. When all the testimonies concluded and the final arguments were presented, Judge Walsh, a man who had presided over that court for 30 years and who prided himself on his ability to discern the truth, announced he would retire to deliberate. The hours of waiting were eternal. Eleanor and Griffin spent them in a small cafe near the courthouse, holding hands under the table, speaking in low voices about everything and nothing, finding comfort in the simple presence of each other. "Whatever happens," said Griffin, his eyes warmer and more expressive than ever, "we have the essential. If we lose the estate, we'll build another home. If we keep it, we'll renovate it completely, as a symbol of this new beginning." Eleanor nodded, feeling a profound peace despite the uncertainty. "We're stronger together than apart. That's the true evidence of our marriage, not the papers or testimonies, but what we've built with each other." When they finally returned to the courthouse to hear the verdict, they did so not as fearful defendants, but as a united couple, ready to face together whatever came. Judge Walsh, with the solemnity proper to his position, announced his decision. The estate would remain in the hands of Griffin and Eleanor Blackwell. The documents presented by the Montgomerys, though historically interesting, didn't have sufficient legal validity to nullify decades of legitimate possession. And most importantly, in the words of the judge himself, this court has witnessed today something uncommon, a marriage that, despite its unconventional beginnings, demonstrates the values of commitment, mutual respect, and conscious love that are the true foundation of the matrimonial institution. As they left the courthouse under the California sun that was beginning to descend toward the horizon, Eleanor and Griffin merged in an embrace that contained everything they had lived. Together, the initial fear, the distrust, the gradual discovery, the joy of a love found not in a blinding flash, but in the constant warm light of daily coexistence. "Let's go home," said Griffin, his forehead resting against hers. "To our home," Eleanor corrected, kissing him softly. And as they returned to the estate that was now truly theirs, not just by legal documents, but by the love they had sown in every corner, both understood that the most powerful evidence of their union wasn't in the papers presented to the court, but in the way their hearts beat at the same rhythm, as if they had been destined to find each other, despite the tortuous paths that had led them to one another. The true evidence of love isn't found in grand gestures or grandiose promises, but in the constancy of small daily acts, in the patience of waiting for the right moment, in the respect that allows the other to be exactly who they are. And perhaps ultimately, the most authentic love isn't what arises spontaneously like a fire, but what is built stone by stone, like a cathedral that defies time and storms. With the legal threat overcome and their marriage stronger than ever, Eleanor and Griffin now faced a new challenge: what to do about the merger of Blackwell Hotels, now officially Vineyard Hotels, with Coastal, which had been suspended during the trial. The proposal was still on the table, but would require Griffin's presence in New York for at least 6 months. "We could postpone it again," Griffin suggested one afternoon, while they reviewed the plans for renovating the east wing of the estate, the one he had once shared with Sophia, and which they would now completely transform. "Or modify the terms to reduce my time in New York." Eleanor studied his face, recognizing the internal struggle he was trying to disguise. On one hand, the merger represented the dream of expanding his chain internationally. On the other, the idea of separating from her, now that they had found their shared rhythm, was painful to him. "Or we could go together, as we initially planned," she responded decisively. "The estate will be here when we return, and meanwhile we could turn this time into an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" he asked, intrigued by the spark in his wife's eyes. "To grow personally and professionally. You would oversee the merger, and I could establish a foundation branch in New York. There are children in need everywhere, not just in Hunters Point." Griffin looked at her with a mixture of admiration and surprise. When had that timid young woman who crossed the threshold of his bedroom with a bouquet of white lilies transformed into this confident woman who now proposed expanding the foundation he had created? "Are you sure?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Eleanor nodded, intertwining her fingers with his. "Completely. New York won't be a parenthesis in our life, Griffin. It will be a new chapter we'll write together." The plan was set in motion with the efficiency that characterized both when they worked in sync. While they managed the preparations for New York, they also supervised the renovation of the east wing of the estate. Eleanor, discovering a natural talent for interior design, worked with architects and local craftsmen to transform what had been a somber space into something luminous and welcoming. "I want it to preserve traditional American elements," she explained to Joseph, the master carpenter carving new oak doors for the rooms, but with a contemporary air. Like our marriage, respecting the roots but looking to the future. The metaphor didn't go unnoticed by Griffin, who observed with fascination how Eleanor directed the project with a combination of respect for the estate's history and a clear vision of what it could become. In each decision, from the choice of artisanal tiles for the bathrooms to the layout of the new library that would replace Sophia's former dressing room, he saw reflected the transformation of their own relationship, a deep renovation that preserved what was valuable and discarded what no longer served. One afternoon, while supervising the installation of large windows that would open the master bedroom to the views of the vineyard, Griffin confessed something he had been considering for a long time. "I've been thinking about changing the company name." Eleanor looked at him, surprised. "Blackwell Hotels, but it's your legacy, what you've built over decades." Griffin smiled, that smile that now often appeared on his formerly serious face. "Precisely. It was my individual project. But now, with the merger and everything we're building together, perhaps it's time for a new name that reflects this new stage." "What do you have in mind?" she asked, moved by the symbolism of the gesture. "I'm not entirely sure yet, but I want it to be something that represents what we've discovered together, that the best things in life aren't those we obtain instantly, but those we cultivate with patience and care. Like the vines," suggested Eleanor, pointing to the century-old vineyards surrounding the estate. "They need years to bear fruit, but when they do, they produce something that nourishes, that illuminates, that endures." "Vineyard," murmured Griffin, savoring the word. "Vineyard hotels. Simple, with roots in our land, but with potential to grow beyond California." Thus was born, amid renovation plans and preparations for New York, not just a new name for the company, but a shared symbol of what their union represented, something rooted in valuable traditions, but oriented toward a future they would build together. The eve of their departure for New York, they organized a small celebration in the partially renovated estate. It wasn't an ostentatious party, but an intimate gathering with the people who had witnessed their transformation. Marianne and the foundation team, Martha and the estate staff, who had become a kind of extended family, some close associates of Griffin's. Even Vivian, who showed an incipient warmth toward Eleanor that no one would have imagined months ago. "Go toast," proposed Jonathan Preston, raising his glass of aged scotch, "to Vineyard Hotels and its founders." "Its founders," repeated Griffin, looking at Eleanor with pride. "I like how that sounds." Afterward, while the guests enjoyed dinner in the apple orchard, illuminated by lanterns that created a magical atmosphere, Griffin led Eleanor to a secluded corner of the garden. Under an ancient cherry tree, whose branches created a natural dome above their heads, he gave her a small carved wooden box. "I wanted to give you this before we leave for New York," he said, with a solemnity that contrasted with the joy of the nearby celebration. Eleanor opened the box with curiosity. Inside rested a white gold ring with a sapphire solitaire surrounded by small diamonds. "It's beautiful," she murmured, moved. "But I already have a wedding ring." "This isn't a wedding ring," Griffin explained, taking the jewel and sliding it onto Eleanor's finger alongside the simple band she had worn since the ceremony. "It's a promise ring, not to seal a contract as we did at the beginning, but to celebrate a choice. My choice to love you each day, not out of duty but desire, not out of convenience but conviction." Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes, reflecting the glow of the lanterns like liquid stars. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received." "More than the estate?" Griffin joked, tenderly drying a tear that rolled down his wife's cheek. "The estate is a place," she responded, repeating the words he himself had pronounced during the trial. "Beautiful, yes, but just a setting. This ring represents what we've built within those walls, a love we consciously choose each day." They kissed under the century-old cherry tree, a silent witness to generations of loves and promises. And when they returned to the celebration, hand in hand, everyone noticed something different about them. A serenity, a certainty, the confidence of those who have found their place in the world, one beside the other. The next morning, as the California sun began to gild the fields, they departed for New York, not as a couple leaving their home behind, but as two people who carry their home within them, in the trust built, in shared dreams, in the certainty that, No matter where they are, they have found in each other the place where they belong. True renewal is never superficial. It's not just about new furniture or fresh colors on the walls, but about transforming spaces, both physical and emotional, to reflect who we are now, not who we were in the past. And perhaps the deepest renewal we can experience is the one that occurs when we decide not only to change our surroundings, but also our way of being in them, with courage, with openness, with the willingness to build something new on old but solid foundations. 6 months in New York became 8, and then 10. The merger of Blackwell Hotels, now officially Vineyard Hotels, with the coastal chain proved more complex than anticipated, requiring Griffin's presence much longer than initially planned. To the surprise of many, it was Eleanor who insisted on staying. "The foundation is taking off here," she explained to Griffin in their apartment overlooking Central Park, as they dined on the terrace under the starry sky of a summer night. "The pilot program with schools in the Bronx is showing exceptional results. It would be irresponsible to abandon it now." Griffin observed her with a mixture of pride and amazement. In these months, Eleanor had blossomed in ways not even he had imagined. She had established the New York branch of the Vineyard Foundation with surprising efficiency, adapting the programs that worked in San Francisco to the specific needs of New York. She had learned to navigate the city well enough to communicate with local families. She had even been invited to give a lecture at Columbia University on innovation in social programs. "You're extraordinary," he told her, raising his glass of wine in an intimate toast. "Do you know what Richard Montgomery said to me yesterday?" Richard Montgomery was the former owner of Coastal Hotels, a New York businessman in his 60s, known for his critical eye and brutal frankness. "That you should have included me in the negotiations from the beginning," she joked, knowing her intervention at some difficult points in the merger had been crucial. Griffin smiled. "Exactly that," he said, and I quote verbatim, "Your wife sees solutions where the rest of us only see problems. If I had known her before, I would have demanded she lead the transition, not you." Eleanor laughed, but there was justified pride in her laughter. She was no longer the insecure young woman who feared not measuring up. She was a woman who had discovered her own worth, her own capabilities, her own voice. "Do you know what's most extraordinary?" continued Griffin, his intense gaze fixed on her. "That you've accomplished all this without changing your essence. You remain the compassionate and genuine person who crossed the threshold of the estate 2 years ago. Only now the world can see what I always intuited was there." The words hit home with Eleanor. It was true. New York had been a revelation, not because it had fundamentally transformed her, but because it had allowed her to discover facets of herself that had always existed, just dormant, waiting for the opportunity to manifest. "New York has been a gift," she reflected, looking at the park gleaming under the moon. "But lately I've been thinking a lot about the estate." Griffin nodded, understanding perfectly. Despite the success in New York, both felt the call of California, of the century-old vineyards, of the impossibly blue sky over golden fields. "The renovations must be almost finished," he said. "Martha says the result is spectacular." "Do you think it's time to go back?" asked Eleanor, expressing the question both had been considering for weeks. Griffin took her hand on the table, caressing the sapphire ring he had given her before leaving with his thumb. "I think it's time to take what we've learned here back home, not as a return to the past, but as the beginning of a new stage." The decision was made. After completing the final details of the merger and ensuring the continuity of the Foundation's programs in New York with a local team, they would return to California. The journey back, 2 years after that wedding night where it all began, had a bittersweet taste. New York had given them so much, professional growth, confidence, a broadening of horizons, that leaving it provoked a certain melancholy. But the anticipation of returning to the estate, now transformed like themselves, created a vibrant excitement that compensated for any nostalgia. They arrived at sunset, when the sun was beginning to sink behind the vineyards, bathing the California landscape with a golden light that seemed to welcome the travelers returning home. Martha was waiting for them at the entrance, her wrinkled face illuminated by a genuine smile. "Welcome home," she said, embracing Eleanor with an affection that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago, when she treated her with the respectful distance she reserved for the new mistress. The estate looked more beautiful than ever. The renovations had respected its historic character, while subtly updating it. The courtyards preserved their essence, but now overflowed with life. The old rooms had been reimagined with a perfect balance between tradition and modernity. The east wing, previously closed and laden with painful memories, now opened luminously toward the gardens, a tangible symbol of its owner's transformation. "It's perfect," murmured Eleanor, touring the renovated spaces with Griffin. "Exactly as we imagined it. With some extra touches," he smiled, leading her to what had been his private study. Eleanor's surprise was absolute to discover that Griffin's former sanctuary had been transformed into a shared space. 2 desks faced each other beside the windows overlooking the vineyard. New shelves housed both his economics books and her literature and social development volumes, and on the main wall, framed with simple elegance, hung documents officially recognizing Eleanor as co-director of both Vineyard Hotels and the Foundation. "When did you do this?" she asked, moved to tears. "During my last trip when I came to supervise the final renovations," he responded. "I wanted it to be a surprise, a symbol that this return isn't going back to the past, but beginning something completely new, something truly ours." That night, as they dined on the terrace under a starry sky that only the California countryside can offer, they reflected on the extraordinary journey they had undertaken together, from that marriage of convenience to the deep partnership they now shared, based on mutual respect, genuine admiration, and a love that had grown slowly but with roots as deep as those of the vines surrounding them. "If someone had told me 2 years ago that we would be here like this," began Eleanor, letting the phrase fade into the warm night. "No one would have believed it," Griffin completed, "not even ourselves. And yet, here we are." "Here we are," he repeated, raising his glass of local wine in a toast, "to the unexpected paths that lead us exactly where we need to be." After dinner, they walked hand in hand through the gardens, illuminated by the full moon. The scent of jasmine and cherry blossoms created an intoxication similar to that first night, but now there was no fear or uncertainty, only the serenity of 2 people who have found their place in the world, one beside the other. They stopped in front of the leather armchair where Griffin had made that first promise. "I won't touch you until you want me to." Embedded in the wall above it, a small silver plaque bore the date of their wedding and a simple phrase, "Where it all began." "It was the greatest act of love anyone has ever done for me," said Eleanor, caressing the engraved letters. "Giving me time, space, choice. And it was the greatest gift I've ever given myself," Griffin responded, embracing her from behind, his chin resting gently on her shoulder. "Allowing myself to wait, to truly know you, to discover that I could love again without fear, without reservations." They turned toward the window overlooking the vineyards, now silvered in the moonlight. In the distance, the lights of San Francisco created a faint glow on the horizon, like a promise that the world was still there, waiting for them when they were ready for new adventures. But for now, this moment, this return, was all they needed. "We're home," whispered Eleanor, leaning against Griffin's chest. "We are," he confirmed, kissing her hair softly. "At last." The true return is never going back to the starting point, because we ourselves are no longer who we were when we began the journey. We return transformed, enriched by the experiences lived, with a new perspective that allows us to see home not just as the place we left behind, but as the space we can now fully inhabit, with all that we have become. 3 years had passed since that first night when Eleanor crossed the threshold of the estate as the wife of a stranger. 3 years of transformation, discovery, and a love that had blossomed slowly like the vines surrounding their home. The Vineyard Estate, as they now called it in honor of the new name of the family business, had become a symbol of renewal for the entire region. Not just for its architecture, which masterfully combined traditional American elements with contemporary touches, but also for what it represented, a center of cultural and social activity where the Vineyard Foundation organized educational programs for children from rural areas, local craftsmanship workshops, and gatherings that strengthened the community fabric. On that special day, the apple orchard overflowed with life. They were celebrating Eleanor and Griffin's 3rd wedding anniversary, but also the official inauguration of the cultural center they had established in a part of the estate, open to the public. It was their way of giving back to the land that had united them, of sharing their fortune in a way that transcended simple philanthropy. Eleanor, splendid in a blue dress that matched the sapphire of her promise ring, welcomed guests with the naturalness of someone who has found their place in the world. At 26, she had blossomed into a self-assured woman, respected both in business circles, where she co-directed vineyard hotels with innovative firmness, and in the social sphere, where the foundation had become a model of effective community intervention. "You're radiant," Griffin whispered in her ear as they greeted guests. At 51, he too had profoundly changed. The worry lines had been replaced by expression lines that spoke of shared laughter. His posture, previously always tense and controlled, now showed a relaxation that only comes with inner peace. "It's happiness," she responded, gently squeezing his hand. "And perhaps another reason too." Griffin's eyes lit up with understanding. They hadn't announced it publicly yet, but in 3 months they would welcome their first child, a new life that would seal the transformation of their extraordinary journey together. Among the guests, familiar faces stood out. Marianne, now General Director of the Foundation with branches in 3 states. Martha, who refused to retire despite the affectionate insistence of both. Mr. Thomas and Martha from Lexington, the elderly couple who had been witnesses to Griffin's past. Even Vivian, who, against all expectations, had become an ally and support, especially since learning she would be a grandmother. But there were also notable absences that, in some way, formed part of the complete story. Sophia, Griffin's first wife, had sent a brief but sincere letter from New York when she learned through common social circles of the success of vineyard hotels and her ex-husband's evident happiness. "I'm glad to know we both found our path, even though we had to separate to achieve it," she had written. Griffin shared the letter with Eleanor without reservations, another sign of how far they had come since those days when he kept an entire wing of the estate locked tight. After the official speeches and the formal inauguration of the cultural center, when the guests dispersed through the gardens enjoying the cocktail hour, Eleanor and Griffin found a moment to slip away to their special place, the small stone bench beneath the century-old apple tree, where years ago they had shared their first truly intimate conversation. "Do you remember the first time we sat here?" she asked, settling beside him on the bench. Griffin smiled, intertwining his fingers with hers. "How could I forget? It was the night my mother visited and made you cry with her comments about Sophia. And you found me here crying like a child," continued Eleanor, resting her head on his shoulder. "It was the first time you truly opened up to me." "I told you I was afraid to love again," recalled Griffin, his voice soft with nostalgia. "Afraid that if I allowed myself to feel, I would be abandoned again. And I confessed my fear of not being enough, of living in the shadow of a memory." They remained silent for a moment, contemplating how the last rays of the sun filtered through the apple tree leaves, creating dancing patterns on the stone ground. "It's curious," Griffin finally reflected, "how our greatest fears turned out to be also our greatest opportunities for growth." Eleanor nodded, thoughtful. "My fear of not being enough drove me to discover who I could truly be, and your fear of abandonment taught you to build a love based on freedom and respect, not possession. And here we are," he said, gently caressing Eleanor's barely rounded belly, where the new life they had created together was growing, coming full circle. "No," she corrected him softly, "beginning a new one." The celebration continued well into the night. Under a starry sky, with paper lanterns illuminating the courtyards and the sound of guitar floating in the jasmine-scented air, the guests witnessed something uncommon, a love that had blossomed not from instant passion, but from the patient building of trust, respect, and mutual knowledge. When the last guests departed, Eleanor and Griffin walked through the silent estate together, turning off lights, collecting forgotten glasses, commenting on anecdotes from the evening. It was a daily ritual they both treasured, these simple moments where complicity manifested in small gestures, shared glances, the non-verbal language of those who have learned to move in harmony. Finally, they reached their bedroom, the room that had once been Griffin's private sanctuary, and was now the most intimate space of their shared life. Through the open windows came the night breeze, laden with the scent of jasmine and moist earth after the evening watering. Eleanor paused before the vanity to remove the sapphire earrings that matched her ring. In the mirror, She caught Griffin's gaze, observing her with a mixture of admiration, desire, and something deeper, a serene gratitude for the journey traveled. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, turning to face him. Griffin approached slowly, taking her face between his hands with infinite tenderness. "I'm thinking about how fortunate I am. About how a marriage that began as a convenient contract has become the most extraordinary gift of my life." "It wasn't luck," Eleanor responded, covering his hands with hers. "It was choice. Each day, each conversation, each challenge overcome together. We chose to build this, stone by stone, moment by moment. Like a vineyard," he smiled, recalling the metaphor that had given name to their renewed company. "Slow growth, deep roots, fruits that nourish and endure." They kissed under the silver moonlight filtering through the windows, a kiss that contained everything they had lived together: the initial fear, the gradually overcome distrust, the friendship that blossomed into respect, the respect that transformed into desire, the desire that matured into a conscious love, chosen, built day by day. As they prepared for sleep, with the relaxed intimacy of those who have learned to share both the great moments and the daily routines, Griffin remembered something. "There's one more gift I wanted to give you," he said, taking out a small package from his bedside table drawer. Eleanor opened it with curiosity. It was an antique key tied with a blue silk ribbon to a small rolled parchment. "What is this?" she asked, unrolling the parchment. "The deed to a piece of land on the Northern California coast," explained Griffin, sitting beside her on the bed. "That hidden cove where I told you I want to for the first time. I bought it for us, to someday build a summer house, a place where our child can discover the sea as I did, where we can escape when we need to remember the essential." Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes, not just for the gift itself, but for what it symbolized. A shared future, a story that would continue to be written, a love that would continue to grow and transform with the passing of the seasons. "It's perfect," she whispered, embracing him with all the force of her emotion. That night, as the estate slept under the starry mantle of the California sky, Eleanor and Griffin rested intertwined, their hearts beating to the same steady rhythm, their breathing synchronized in the deep peace of those who have found their place in the world, one beside the other. And each time Eleanor passed the leather armchair where Griffin had made that first promise, she smiled, knowing those words, "I won't touch you until you want me to," had been the greatest act of love anyone had ever offered her, a gift of time and space that had allowed something infinitely more valuable than instant passion to blossom between them, a love built on foundations of respect, patience, and the courage to be vulnerable together. In a world obsessed with perfect beginnings and instant passions, perhaps the most revolutionary love story is the one that reminds us that the best loves aren't those that happen in a blinding flash, but those we build consciously, day after day, choice after choice. Like the century-old vines surrounding the estate, these loves grow slowly, but develop roots so deep that no storm can uproot them. And their fruits, trust, complicity, a shared home, nourish not only those who cultivate them, but also all who have the fortune to shelter under their generous shade.